welcome to the Backstage Creative. My name is Krista Copper. On this podcast, I interview people who work behind the scenes of theater. So people who music direct and design and run the soundboard in the back and stage manage and do all of the dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of jobs that go into creating a live production. One of my priorities back when I started to create this podcast was that I wanted to make sure that I interviewed not just people who lived in New York and worked on Broadway, but also people who lived in different major cities, so people who worked in Chicago or Kansas City, where I live, or LA or San Francisco. I wanted to make sure that this podcast wasn't just people who had won Tonys and, worked on Broadway and were making it in New York. I definitely interview those people. I have a few interviews coming up of people who have won Tonys, and I definitely interview a lot of people who live in New York, right? Because that's where there's a lot of incredible theater going on, right? Like it's New York City. There's also so much great art happening in Denver and Houston and all of these, Oklahoma City and all of these other towns, that I wanted to make sure that I also celebrated and highlighted. In addition to that, I also wanted to make sure that I didn't just interview people who, were at the climax of their career, or who had won Tonys, like I said, or went to the quote unquote right schools for their industry. I wanted to make sure that I interviewed people from all over the spectrum, people who are still in college or who had just graduated, or, who have been doing this for decades, or people who even do theater part-time. I wanted to make sure that I interviewed a variety of people, because I think that's important. One of the beautiful things about theater and art is that it belongs in every culture, right? Like every culture has art. Every city has some sort of art. Even, I grew up in rural Kansas, like very cows and wheat fields, but there was still art. There were still rock bands and arts and crafts fairs and community plays that would happen. So I think that's one of the things I really want to celebrate on this podcast, is the fact that theater is happening all over the country, all over the world. It's not just happening in New York and London, and it's not just being created by people who went to the top schools and, have all of the awards. It's deeper than that. Today I'm sharing with you a conversation I had with Carleigh Wagner. Carleigh is a fairly recent college graduate and is working at the Glimmerglass Festival. Carleigh and I were housemates together at Creed Repertory Theater, and she was one of the people that inspired me to start this podcast. We would come home after work or after a show and, sit around the kitchen table eating and talking about our day. And Carleigh is so passionate about the work that she does, and is very passionate about art and theater and collaboration. And I would go see a show and she would she would say, did you see the floor? I painted the floor, and I, used this new technique that I was really excited about. Did you notice the floor? And I'd be like, oh, no. And so she just helped me appreciate theater more, and she helped me be more analytical and notice the details that go into creating the bigger whole. And so I'm very grateful for having lived with Carleigh and gotten to see her perspective on theater. I love people who are passionate. There's something so contagious about someone who's passionate about what they do. And I think, especially in this industry, you need a lot of passion, because it can get really hard, right? And it can get really difficult to hang in this career and to keep going when things get tough. But being around people who are passionate and people who are excited about what they do, even if maybe you're not excited, like you'll hear in the interview, like Carleigh really is fascinated by paint, and I am not, but I think her passion and her excitement for it and her awe of it excites me, even if it's something that I'm not necessarily excited about myself. Like that's contagious, right? Like that enthusiasm is very contagious. And so I'm grateful to know people like Carleigh who make me excited and make me see things from a different perspective than what I'm used to. And this was a good conversation. I'm very excited to share it with you. So here we go. Let's get to my conversation with Carleigh Wagner. Are you still at Glimmerglass, or is that finished?
I am at Glimmerglass until the end of their summer 2020 season, which is hopefully still on. But yeah, I've been at Glimmerglass since September and I've been working one on one with their associate scenic charge, Sasha, who is in contact with our scenic charge, who is an educator. So everyone's kind of spread out over the off season, but the two of us, Sasha and I, get to paint backdrops together and paint some of the bigger pieces of scenery before everyone else gets here in May for the 2020 season. So we're just doing a lot of prep work. We're doing a lot of cool stuff.
So how does that work? Do you get a pretty specific design from a designer? Is it pretty vague and you get to have a lot of artistic license with it? How does that work? Like knowing what to paint at what color, and what texture and whatnot.
So the paint process is different with each designer that you work with. I found out you start with the rendering or the model pieces or a sketch on a napkin or a conversation with the designer if you're lucky enough. And then you take that piece of artwork and you make a sample for them, which is pretty fun because that's when you get to allow yourself to play and to really communicate with the designer back and forth. Once you and the designer come across something that you both like for and you know that you're connecting on the same level about something, then you can really just kind of go for it, which is the fun part. You don't really just get to have your own artistic license. Everything becomes like a technique or a tool.
Do you have interest in designing, or do you like kind of like the hands-on, like actually making a design?
I have such a love for both. I have my degree from Oklahoma City University in design and technology with an emphasis in scenic design. So a lot of my projects that I got to do in college, they were mostly design based, and learning how to think like a designer I think is so beneficial to being alive. um, and then right now I'm really enjoying painting. I think they're just two totally separate worlds. They exercise two different parts of the mind. One is both of them are problem solving, but one of them is very in the moment and one of them is leading up to a moment.
Hmm.
I would say scenic design is leading up to the moment where you have it right and you're communicating what you're having right or what you think that you have right, and then you communicate it to a group of individuals that either want you to keep working or they get inspired by the work that you've done. And then with scenic painting, it's different. It's you're working in the moment with the paint, and you don't necessarily have that time when you're doing a project to change your process once you get started. So I think they're totally two different mindsets. But I really do enjoy design. But right now, since graduating, I've been in paint world for about a year, and I'm not hating it. I love it so much that I think, yeah, I think when we lived together, like that was my world, and like my mind hasn't changed on it at all. It still like wakes me up in the morning, and
Hmm.
it's my favorite thing to do.
Yeah, that's got to be so rewarding too, like having like a finished product. Like I painted that or I helped build that. Like as a musician, there's not always like a finished, we don't get to like see a finished product, mostly cuz we're like playing the show.
Yeah, being able to see a finished product is, I think, the most rewarding part, and it's something that I take very seriously because you're working on top of other people's work.
Hmm.
All of the carpenters and all of the TDs, they've put in work on every single piece that you're painting. It's cool to see how many hands that it goes through and to know that when they pass it off to you, they're trusting you to be that final quality control and like, how can I make this look the absolute best? And exactly what the designer is going towards, I think is a real gift.
Hmm.
As far as painting goes, it's really rewarding to take something that other people don't understand how it's going to end up looking like how it's supposed to. And then if they pop in on your process, they're still confused. They're like, how is this going to look like this? And you're like, just give it time. Please just trust my process. And then they show up and they're like, wow, I had no idea. This is actually amazing. It looked like shit a couple days ago and now it's amazing. And yeah, it's so rewarding and exciting. And yeah, it's such a blessing. I think that's why I love doing scenic art so much.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. That's a cool perspective. How does that? So you said it was you and another person working. And you're working in an off season at a theater. Does that get lonely?
Yeah, so we're at Glimmerglass Opera in Cooperstown, New York. It's a big tourist town in the summer, like most theater companies are, opera in this case. But during the off season, it's quite rural. There are 12 of us working. There are a couple people leading the team and drafting and communicating with designers. There are a handful of people constructing all of these designs and then handing it over to the two of us that are painting them right now. It's a big shift from doing summer stock because it's a 9 to 5, or in this case, 8 to 7 job. Yeah, we chose to work 10-hour days just because we'll get more done, honestly. So we do 10-hour days, 4 days a week. Working in the off season is so different from working summer stock because the energy is different. It's you and one other person doing something humongous that you are used to having a different energy towards or a different time frame for. So working in the off season, we have a lot more time to work on these projects. So they, I think, become more of a passion project depending on what it is,
Hmm.
rather than a product you're putting out and cranking out as fast as you can. I do appreciate that part of the off season.
Is that fairly common for theaters to have people building in the off season, or is that an exception?
I think Glimmerglass is an exception to have people be able to produce their own scenery. A lot of bigger companies either shop out their scenery, or it will be a summer stock situation where people show up months in advance and crank out all of their scenery in 2 months. I just worked at Williamstown Theater Festival in Massachusetts this past summer, and we show up and there's nothing done, nothing but ideas and people that are excited to work. And then we crank out 8 shows at least in about 2.5 months.
Oh.
So it's just a totally different atmosphere. It's a totally different challenge. Yeah, so Glimmerglass has been a really fun exception. They only started doing this about 3 to 5 years ago, working during the off season, and it's allowed them to make bigger shows and complete bigger, better designs and really become like the world renowned company that they are.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. I mean, I understand like the logistics of having everyone there at once, but I worked at a theater this past summer, and it was such a small space. And so, people were trying to paint and build things, and then, musicians were trying to get into the pit to rehearse, and costume people were running around. And so it's just like everyone was kind of on top of each other trying to get, frantically trying to get things done. So I like that idea of kind of taking it slower and, um,
And I've been told Glimmerglass is that way during the summer as well. Like we go from a staff of 12 people to 200 people, still trying to create the same goal, but we will have about 70% of the scenery done, and that does allow for more to happen, I think. But it
mhm.
it will still end up being orchestra members and costumers fighting for the same parking spot.
Yeah.
I don't think, unfortunately, with theater that that will ever change. I think it's part of the beauty of it.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you just graduated from school. I love talking to people who, are just a few years out of school, whatever level of degree they got. Has there been anything like surprising about professional life versus what your perception of professional life was going to be when you were in school?
When I was in school, I had no idea what to expect. We did have classes that were professional preparation and things like that that really taught us that you're going to have to go get whatever you want for yourself in this industry. Those were often seminars with people from multiple disciplines. So I think I was just going into it with an open mind, going into the real world. I think I have been extremely lucky to see opportunities, know people that have been affected by my work. They've given me opportunities and opened doors for me that have led me on quite a natural path of like going into summer stock out of school. I got to do that at least once before school ended, so I knew what I was going into with that. And then because I did a good job there and I met new people to be mentors and to mentor, I got this gig at Glimmerglass as an off-season paint intern, and that's been like a really relaxed way to enter the industry. I know some people jump straight into freelancing. I'm happy that that's not something that I had to do. I think that I've been extremely like lucky to fall into the situation that I'm in because it's been teaching me not only what I want about my craft but also about who I am as a person and what I might want in the future as far as location goes and my work goes. Something else that surprised me out of school was at the end of school, I think everyone kind of has the same attitude like, please just get me out of here, I'm ready. Like, I did feel that, but I also feel so much gratitude towards what I gained from school that I didn't necessarily find important while I was there.
Hmm.
So, being able to draw on different things from school that maybe I should have paid attention to more has become beneficial just in everyday life.
Can you give an example of like one of those things?
One of those things I would say is communicating with different kinds of people.
Hmm.
OCU, where I went to school, did a really good job at housing master classes and seminars and getting us out at the conventions and telling us, know your elevator speech, know who's in the room, not necessarily what you can gain from them, but keep like a positive attitude and keep yourself open to the possibility that they might be an important person in your life, whether you know them or not. So that's one of the things I didn't necessarily think was important when I was trying to get assignments done. But now that I'm interacting with all these people within the field, being kind, being open, putting a lot of pride in my work has gotten me so far. And I think school like really did put a big stress on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm one of the reasons I love theater so much is because you do get to interact with all of these people from disciplines that are on one hand so different from yours, but on the other hand like still art. And so
Yeah,
you get to see art from through different people's eyes, and so that helps your art be deeper and more impactful, I think, and I love it.
and I think seeing the pride that other people put into their work just makes me put more pride into my work.
Mm-hmm.
So really like surrounding myself with who I want to become has become a huge part of why I'm still in theater.
Yeah, when I look at especially stage managers and sound engineers and how hard they work and how long their days are and some of the kind of uncomfortable no-win situations that they sometimes have to deal with. Like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I want to complain about being in a really tiny, small pit space, with hardly any room to move around. But yeah, there's so much inspiration to be found just from like watching other people do their work.
Yeah, and taking pride in their work and being excited about the little things just makes me more excited about the little things, and then getting to share it with people just like this makes it
Mm-hmm.
all worth it. Seeing a show that I did work on or that I didn't work on and knowing that process and all the work that went into it, it's a totally different experience.
Mm-hmm. How do you handle criticism?
I think criticism within work that comes from your hands can be taken very seriously. Sometimes people take criticism to heart, and as they should. I personally think that what I'm delivering is a product to somebody, and while I put my heart into it, at the end of the day, it's not just mine. So taking criticism as far as the way something looks, it may provide an inconvenience of, oh, I have to start over, but you learn how to work with a new type of person or a new type of material or communicate in a different way based off of that criticism. So if you never get criticism from somebody, I don't think that allows you to grow. Working with Sasha so closely right now as my mentor, I'm like, please call me out on anything annoying that I'm doing because I don't want that to be a pet peeve of someone that's not willing to bring that up to me. Being called out on things whether it be an action that I do unknowingly, something that I do that is just a different style that somebody else wants. I think being called out on those things really helps me to grow. So I personally welcome criticism, at least now when I'm still like green and learning. I never want to stop learning. Everyone in this industry or everyone that paints has a different technique to do the same thing. So sometimes criticism is the only way to really keep your mind open. I like criticism.
Yeah, that's a really good perspective. I think there has to be like a line between like yourself and your identity and the art that you do.
Mhm.
Um, especially when you're like when someone's paying you, there is some you do give up some of your individualness.
Right, and I think painting as a trade, I take criticism a lot lighter and I welcome it more than I would in a design scenario. I think I would take criticism a lot more personally from a designer because that comes from my mind instead of from my hands.
Hmm.
And it's way harder to change your mind than it is to change your technique.
Hmm. Interesting. Where do you find inspiration? And you can go anywhere you want, any way you want, like whether inspiration for when you're designing or inspiration for when you're painting.
I find my inspiration in nature. I'll often find myself just on my phone, like photographing anything that I notice that I see differently than other people, trying to keep my eye sharp. So every painter slash designer will brag about their eye, like they have a good eye for this or they have a good eye for that. I like to see the whimsy in things. I like to see things from a different perspective. I really enjoy color theory. All of these are strengths in my painting and my designs. So when I need inspiration, I try to surround myself with either eclectic, colorful people, cultures, scenarios, or right now in rural Cooperstown, outside seems to be my biggest inspiration. So much of painting and design is mixing problem solving with play.
Mm.
So I find inspiration in not taking myself too seriously, not being afraid to kind of experiment. Something now is like I've been painting with acrylic paints and those peel off like plastic or like they separate quite easily. So on my Instagram there's so many videos of just paint swirling and like looking really cool just by opening the lid and because it's separated. So just seeing what paint does by itself without me manipulating it, I think I get as inspired from paint misbehaving than actually using it how it's supposed to be used. Yeah, keeping my eyes sharp, I think, and just not being afraid to take the time to notice things is where I really find my inspiration.
I've asked that question to a lot of people, and it's one of my favorite questions to ask. And one of my favorite responses is basically like what you just said is just finding inspiration kind of where it's least expected or kind of in like the randomness of life or in just like the little we're helping create a story, right? And if a story is real and it affects people if it's has element of like real life in it. And so I think if that's where you're finding your inspiration, then your art is more effective.
Yeah, I would agree.
Do you have any like resources in terms of like books or websites or certain people's Instagrams that you go to help you grow or find inspiration?
A lot of my resources have been personal experience as far as workshops and things go. I think I've gained so much by not being afraid to say yes to a class or to chatting with somebody just like this. If I'm needing inspiration for why do I want to go to work today, I'll go on Scenic Art Studios Instagram. They are my ultimate goal of where I want to work. I geek out over them all the time because they get to do what I love to do is just paint backdrops all day, every day. And their social media coordinator or designer sees things in a way that I like to look at things just by the randomness and by zooming in on the small details. They also have a lot of artists on their page that do other types of art. So, like, they are illustrators for children's books, or I'm friends with some performers and they're in shows in Chicago for Cabinets of Curiosity. They do a lot of handmade puppets and just really odd, strange things. But seeing their shows, not being afraid to look at other art and reach out to those artists that are tagged and really like ask them questions or look into what other types of art they create, I think has been my biggest resource.
Mhm. I need to be better about that, like, just reaching out and asking people questions, like, I think a lot of people are willing to help and, like, share their wisdom than I think we realize.
Yeah, and I think people do want to share, and people are usually their worst critics, so they don't necessarily know that others are being inspired by them. So if you reach out and you tell them that, that compliment usually opens them up to answer any questions that you have. Like, why does this, in your case, like when we're doing the same thing, why does it sound different? Like the way you play this song versus when I play it, and blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
Like, I'm sure that you could use that for any aspect of theater.
Mhm. So take us through your background, where you grew up, how you got into theater, kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I grew up in Oklahoma City. There's not a huge theater market there, but there is a children's theater called Oklahoma Children's Theater. And I grew up doing their camps, volunteering there, teaching their camps until kind of they started asking me to do favors. And any artist knows that, like, once someone finds out that you're talented or whatever, knows that people start asking you to do things for them. Like, oh, could you paint this little thing for me? Oh, I see you're good at drawing. Could you draw this for me? And they were the first place that taught me to have pride in that and use it as a career rather than a way to feel good doing favors for people. I luckily like was fostered there and they gave me an eye into, okay, there's a way to do art in a way that invites community and not necessarily in a way where I have to lock myself up and wait until something inspires me to create something like a fine artist piece. I can do something that takes the minds of many and is way bigger than what I could accomplish on my own. I enjoy that, and that's why I'm still here. So then that was on the campus of Oklahoma City University. And naturally, like, I started appreciating the campus as I grew up, and some of the mentors there knew the boss at Oklahoma Children's Theater and they were talking about me, and I feel like they had all these plans for me before I even knew what what life had in store. So I ended up going to Oklahoma City University for design and technology. I really came into that program. I really liked that program. It was a small program that allowed me to have mentors and be a mentor, but it was also very demanding. And I found out that I kind of thrive in an intense environment. I think my problem solving and like my brain works better under pressure. I was encouraged to do my first summer stock theater, like go out and find a job, don't just sit here and be a student. And like Creed Repertory Theater is my first like summer stock theater kind of entry to the business, and I was the only painter besides a shop swing, which was amazing to have, but it was like, all right, you kind of know how to do this, jump in. Luckily, like, it turned out amazing, and Creed was a welcoming place, and I had some friends there, and like I made a lot of friends there, so I really felt myself and my career blossoming. Leaving Creed, like, I really mentored the underclassmen and tried to give them some of the inspiration that I felt, like the newfound love for, I guess, what theater could mean, regardless of what you were contributing. That led me, as well as gaining a new mentor, led me to Williamstown Theater Festival. We had a common thread. She used to work there like 11 years ago. So she didn't know any of the people that worked there now, but it was amazing to have my work trusted based off of other people's words. And I think that's something huge in our industry that people are still doing. So then working while at Williamstown, it was the most scenery, the most work that I've ever like been a part of. Like I said, they produce 8 shows plus within 2.5 months. It was a crazy, crazy experience. It was very intense, but it was also like eye opening as far as like proving to yourself what you're capable of. During that summer, someone from Glimmerglass reached out to Williamstown, my charge at Williamstown, Julia, and they were like, "We need a paint intern. We're going to try expanding our paint team from 1 person to 2 people this off season. Do you have anyone that's not returning to school but is open to an internship position?" They forwarded that email to me, and I knew that she trusted that I could do it. So I applied and I went through the interview process, and me and Sasha really got along over the interview, and I showed up in September, and I've been here ever since. And it's been amazing because it's like I've slowly gotten to like climb my way up a little bit and observe in the industry kind of where I want to be, but also I've been able to do that in a natural sense as far as like my life progression goes, which is such a gift. Yeah, this is my first time not living in Oklahoma close to my parents, but I'm in a strong community of people, and I'm learning so much and I'm so grateful.
You've mentioned like mentors and being a mentor a lot. What are like important things that you've learned through either being a mentor or a mentee or both?
I learned how to be a mentor at Oklahoma Children's Theater teaching children. Children are really so like unpredictable and diverse in the way they react to things, and that has really taught me how to deal with adults. After being a student and really trying to absorb everything that my mentors had to offer me, I was lucky to have some very amazing mentors that were strict but communicative as far as painting goes, learning techniques and different thought processes from them. And then, so that kind of helped me transition how to mentor as far as like working with kids into how to mentor in a paints department. Yeah, I think teaching is something that comes naturally to me, anyways, right now. And I like to see other people's creativity spark. So, any way that I can help to do that, whether it be breaking something down, showing people that scenic painting can be simple, it can be like a step by step process, it can work with different mindsets and different ways of seeing, have been kind of my favorite ways to mentor, is to just like open someone's eyes and prove to them that they can do something that they didn't think that they could, because I've had that for me and it's been immeasurable.
So when I think of a mentor, I think of someone who like is more than a teacher, right? Like a mentor has more of
Mhm.
a weight to it than a teacher. So how do you what makes a mentor more?
Someone that is open to answering the life questions along with the career questions. My first mentor outside of Oklahoma Children's Theater was Deborah Hicks. She was my first paint teacher at Oklahoma City University, and she cared about her students as much as she cared about herself. And that was something that was inspiring to me. If you showed her the same respect as she showed you, she opened up to you and she would give you life lessons just like a grandparent would. And she would make sure all of the students were taken care of as far as feeling community and feeling at home within the school. And that was something that inspired me. Mentoring people the way that I get to do it in paint is just kind of allowing them to explore instead of just teaching them like step A through step Z.
Yeah, like holding it's almost like holding space for people.
Yeah, and I'm sure mentors in different fields are seen differently. I think a mentor is just basically connecting with somebody on a personal level, believing in their growth as a person as well as their career.
Yeah. If you had to choose, let's say like top 3 skills needed to be can you say like are paint charge and scenic charge are they interchangeable?
It depends on how many people are on the team. Paint charge, scenic charge, yeah, those are interchangeable. Charge artist slash like staff scenic, those are pretty interchangeable. Yeah, there's a whole hierarchy depending on how many people you have on your team.
Okay, so let's say the top 3 skills needed to be a paint charge.
Communication is the first one, because you're communicating with designers, you're communicating with directors, you're communicating with project managers, you're communicating with your team of artists and also carpenters and people from all fields. So, communicating with all types of people, much like a music director would, is number one. Number two is, I think, artistry, being able to communicate with your stroke and your paintbrush as much as your words. So being able to basically put your skill behind what you've been saying. And then I think number three, if you do have a big team of people and you can't necessarily carry out everything on your own, number three would be trust. I think you have to trust your team that you've picked to be able to be your hands, because at the end of the day, whoever the paint charge is communicating with expects the show to look like the paint charge painted every single piece. And often that's not a possibility because of the amount of work that has to be done. So, really trusting your team to use the process that you've sampled and that you've created and listen, but also have their own eye for the finish that you're looking for, I think is very important.
Due to like the high volume of work that you're usually given, like do you ever get overwhelmed by all that there is to be done, and how do you work through that?
Paint, in particular, allows for a lot of different moments in each process. So, say I'm given a bunch of renderings and a bunch of scenery, and they're like, all right, make it happen, you have a week. I think that because paint needs time to dry, that there's a renewal in each step.
Hmm.
So that particularly keeps me from getting overwhelmed because I look forward to the next step until it's complete. And because I am so enthralled with what paint does, sometimes along the way, I like to just stop and go, oh my gosh, look how pretty that part is. I can't wait for it to dry so that I can like keep working on it. So it's just like not being afraid to geek out over what I'm working on. And like sometimes it's not as fun as painting a giant backdrop rainbow colors, but sometimes it's how realistic can I make this look with what tools. So I think there's always something exciting about it for me, and that keeps me from getting overwhelmed because there's a renewal process within each step.
Hmm. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
So I have to give you some credit for this podcast because it was, like Carleigh had kind of mentioned, her and I, along with like 4 other people, were roommates at Creed Repertory Theater, and I just loved sitting and hearing about other people's jobs. And I never had thought about like, oh yeah, of course someone's painting those sets, and someone's sewing, someone sewed that costume together. And so I Carleigh was one of the people that had planted this podcast in my mind, because I just had enjoyed like sitting around eating a meal together and talking about our jobs. So
Yeah, thank you for listening and using it for something positive.
yeah. So my final question would be advice to young people, whether they're interested in painting or scenic design, who want to be involved in theater, as a full time career.
Yeah, I would say be open, I think is the thing that I've taken to heart the most that has provided the best outcome or come into fruition the most is just be open to what other people are telling you. Don't get so self-involved that you pin yourself against the world, because everyone in this career, I think, wants to inspire others and wants to share what they've had to really slave over, what they've really had to work towards. They want to share what has come out of that. So, anytime that you are in a room with somebody that is offering you advice, take notes. I have a little notebook from Williamstown. I wish I kept one in Creed, but you will be inspired by so many people and you will think that you can remember it. But take notes on the advice that people give you and really use it, because it will put you in places that you didn't know that you could get faster than you believed that it could happen.
The music for the Backstage Creative was improvised and performed by Ian Leroy, and the logo was designed by Zach Rimbold.